Welcome everybody. First of all, thank you, Mrs. Shliach Sibur, for hosting. Bezrat Hashem, you should enjoy your new home. It should be a home full of bracha, full of shalom, full of shechina, and always, starting off in the right way with Torah and with Gemilut Chasadim. Bezrat Hashem should always be that way. It should be a home where the shechina is here. We know that the shalom bayit, having shalom in the home, brings the shechina in the home. The Gemara says that ish ve'isha zachu shechina b'neihem. When there's man and woman that have the zechut, the shechina is resting among them. And Chachamim say the idea is that when the man is doing his job to bring the shechina into his life, and the woman is doing her job to bring the shechina into her life, they bring the shechina into the home. Because ish and isha are both the same letters of esh. Ish has a yud in it. It takes esh, fire, and brings the yud into it, and which is part of the name of Hashem. And isha that brings the hay down. They both do their own avodah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and together they bring the shechina into the home. Bezrat Hashem. So let's get started. So originally the idea was, when we started a few times ago, or whatever, it was a month and a half ago, the idea was to go through every malacha. First shiur we did was on halakha nero, that was posted online. The second shiur, we decided to go through every malacha of Shabbat one by one, and really to focus on each malacha. The first few malachot seemingly are very irrelevant to today's life, because you're not plowing, you're not planting, you're not harvesting, you're not doing any of these things. But we'll see that there are many practical applications, and there are a lot of concepts that you pick up from these malachot that could be applied anywhere in Hilchot Shabbat. So today we're going to focus on the malacha of harvesting, of basically cutting something out of the ground. And then next week we'll start to get, or next 2 weeks, next class, we'll focus, that'll begin, the next malacha will be dash, which will focus on the kitchen related malachot. Just to recap a little bit of what we said last time, the first 11 malachot that are listed out of the 39 malachot of Shabbat, the first 11 have to do with the process of making bread. And the way they were used in the Mishkan is they would do these malachot for making dyes, to dye certain parts of the Mishkan, certain materials that needed to be dyes. The dyes were made from herbs, so they would first have to plow, and then plant, and then harvest it, and etc., until they would bake it or boil it and get the color out. So the malacha that we're up to is Melechet Kotzer, harvesting. So the concept of the malacha, the idea of the malacha, is detaching something from its source of nutrition and life where it's connected to. That's really what the malacha is. That's the umbrella of the malacha. Now, as with all malachot, there are going to be some things that are asurim mideoraita, that are strictly Torah forbidden because of this malacha, and there are going to be some things that are not Torah forbidden, but Chachamim said are asur. For example, we'll learn if something is maybe a branch that's fully dry, that's not getting nourishment, to break that off wouldn't be deoraita, it would be derabanan, perhaps. Other things that Chachamim said are asur, will Bezrat Hashem cover. Okay, so first thing is the halacha brings down, the Ramah brings down, that if you have a tree which has already been detached from before Shabbat, meaning you have a branch that's already been detached before Shabbat, you're allowed to detach things from it on Shabbat. So, for example, most practical example is you have a grapevine. You're allowed to take the grapes off of the vine on Shabbat. Yeah, sometimes they sell tomatoes attached to the vine. You're allowed to remove those from the vine on Shabbat because it's already been disconnected from its source of growth. Now, an interesting question that somebody asked was whether or not they're allowed to take flowers out of water on Shabbat. What would the halacha be with that? Or sometimes, like in shul, they have these bisamim things sitting in the water. You want to take it out to smell it, or you want to break it off. Would that be a problem, or would that not be a problem? Is that similar to detaching or not? So, but last time when we spoke about planting, we spoke about putting flowers in. If your kid comes and knocks over the flowers, could you put them back in? You could listen to last time's shiur for that. But what about taking flowers out of water on Shabbat? So on the one hand, you would think that maybe there's room to say that it's a little bit different than picking something from the ground, because it's not connected, it's not rooted, it's not really, it's not its source of life. It's maybe being sustained a little bit longer, but it's not connected to its source of nutrition. It's not in the dirt. So maybe you would think that it would be allowed. That's right, even though, and the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about this case. He talks about something a little bit similar. He talks about if you have a flower pot which is detached from the ground. So that wouldn't be a problem mideoraita. It wouldn't be a problem to pick something out of that flower pot, but midirabanan it would be. So perhaps this also would be midirabanan, right? But one line of argument would be to say that since this is not attached and it's not getting nourishment from the ground, it would be allowed. And as a matter of fact, there is a sefer that's quoted. It's quoted that the sefer Tal Orot says that this is allowed. However, the issue is that there's a Gemara Yerushalmi that says that if you take a fish out of water, that's also violating Kotzer. That's violating harvesting, because you're detaching something from its natural place of growth. Now, the halacha doesn't follow that. The reason the halacha doesn't follow that is because we have a very important rule that the malacha of kotzer, of harvesting or detaching something from the ground, is only with what's called gidule karka, things that grow from the ground. A fish does not grow from the ground. Therefore, you're allowed to take the fish out of water. It wouldn't be violating kotzer. It would be violating a different thing if you're killing the fish. That might be a different issue. But it wouldn't be violating kotzer. So because of that, because the reason that we don't hold of that Gemara is because that Yerushalmi is because it's not something that grows from the ground. It sounds like otherwise, if it was something that grows from the ground, it would be a problem to take it out of the water. So therefore, there are poskim that write that taking flowers or bisamim out of water or cutting them if they're in the water would be an issue. Therefore, it should be something that's avoided on Shabbat. Okay, so another thing that poskim talk about is, let's say you're walking down the sidewalk and you see some flowers, nice jasmine flowers that smell really good. Are you allowed to smell them, or are we worried that you're going to pluck them? So what do you ladies say? Would it be allowed, not allowed? Not allowed? Allowed. Okay, we have a machloket. Okay, so the Gemara says, you say you could.
You could.
Change your mind.
The fruits you can touch it.
Okay, so we have a veteran here. You should be giving the shiur. Is that Hashem next time? The fruits, that's what the Gemara says. Fruits, you're not allowed to smell or admire when they're on the tree by touching them. But flowers, you can. Why? What's the difference? Anybody?
You may come to take it if it's desirable to eat.
So why may I not come to take the flower?
You're not going to eat the flower.
Exactly.
Just like to like it's good where it's supposed to be like.
Right. You can get what's a flower's purpose? To smell. You can do that without detaching it. What's a fruit's purpose? To eat. You can't do that without detaching it. Even if you want to bite it off of the thing, you just detached what's in your mouth. Right? So it's impossible to get the benefit of the fruit without detaching the fruit. Therefore, when it comes to fruit, Chachamim said you're not allowed to smell it on the tree because you may come to pick it. But when it comes to flowers, that would be allowed. A person would be allowed to smell flowers when they're on the tree. Now, another thing that the poskim get into, which there's a lot of very important fundamental rules with regard to this halacha. So the Shulchan Aruch writes that if you have tall grass, a field of tall grass, and you want to walk through it on Shabbat, Shulchan Aruch says you could do it, and we're not worried that grass might get cut as you're walking, or you might pluck out grass as you're walking. Now, the basis for this ruling is there's something in halacha called davar she'eno mitkaven. Means I don't have kavana to do the iser. I'm trying to do something else. I'm just trying to get from point A to point B. I don't intend at all to pluck grass. So there's a caveat to this halacha. There's something called psik resha. So generally, davar she'eno mitkaven, you don't have kavana, it's mutar. But there's something called a psik resha. Psik resha means it's 100% going to happen. So if it's something that the malacha is 100% going to happen, it's asur. So now let's plug that formula in over here. So I'm trying to cross the field. There's grass. Is the grass going to get cut? Is it going to become detached? Maybe, maybe not. It's not 100% going to happen. So therefore, it's a davar sheinu mitkaven. It's allowed. Now, the Mishnah Brura writes, but if you're going to run, then it's 100% going to cut out grass, and that would be a problem. Now, that ruling is not agreed upon. Many poskim say, what are you talking about? It's not 100%. Just because you're running across, it's not for sure going to pull out grass. And even if you say at the end, it's a long field, for sure when you cross the whole field, you'll pull out grass. But each step is still not 100% that you're going to pull out grass. And we view each step as a separate action. But the final ruling is that it's mutar, but for a different reason. And according to this reason, the poskim also talk about strollers, right? Pushing strollers across a grassy area where there's longer grass. That could be, that may for sure pull out grass. You're always going to end up with grass stuck in the stroller wheels. So, Rovadia says a ruling like this. This is very important. He says it's true. It may 100% pull out grass. You may, if you're pushing a stroller across the field, you might pull out grass 100%. It's a psik ratio, which means, again, just plugging in the rules. Did you have kavanah to pull out grass? Did you intend to do it? No. So it should be mutar. But it's for sure going to happen. So it should be asur. But Rovadia writes that if what's happening is an isur dirabanan and you don't really care for it, then it would be allowed. So in this case, we have to analyze. Is pulling out the grass dirabanan? So generally, if you go and you pull out grass, that would be an isur deoraita. But over here, it's being done in a roundabout way. It's being done in a way that's a shinui. It's not the normal way of pulling out grass to run and pull it out with your feet or to pull it out with a stroller. And also, when you're doing a malacha that's not a productive malacha because you're not actively using the grass, it's only a malacha it's only an isur deoraita to pluck something from the ground when you use it. The grass, you're not using it. So therefore, pulling out the grass in this situation would only be derabanan. And the rule is, it's called psik reisha delo nichale b'derabanan. Okay? That means it's something that the malacha is for sure going to happen. It's a psik reisha, but I don't necessarily want it to happen. I don't care about it. And at the end of the day, it's only derabanan, so that would be allowed. It's a very important rule, it applies to almost all of Hilchot Shabbat to know this rule. Even though this case may not be an everyday case, it is pretty common, pushing strollers in grassy areas, but you can have many cases which would be much more common that are going to follow this rule. I'm not trying to do the malacha, but the malacha is going to end up happening, and it's only a malacha derabanan, and I don't want it to happen, I don't care about it. That would be allowed. Okay, next thing is that the Chachamim spoke about the using trees on Shabbat. There's an isser to use trees on Shabbat or on Yom Tov because it may lead to a person picking something from a tree, picking off a branch, or picking off a fruit, knocking the fruit down, or something like that. Therefore, a person is not allowed to climb a tree. A person is not allowed to lean on a tree. Chachamim said a person can't ride an animal also because they may come to take off a stick from a tree to guide the animal or to hit the animal. So using a tree is asur. To put something on a tree would be asur. To take something off a tree will be asur. We're gonna get to very practical applications of this in a moment. The first thing is that just when it comes to leaning on a tree, the Mishnah Brura writes, the Chafetz Chaim says that if it's a very sturdy tree, like a hard tree that's not going to move when you lean on it, you're allowed to lean on it. Just you shouldn't put your whole body weight on it, but a person could lean on it lightly. But otherwise, it's a problem to use trees. As a matter of fact, Chachamim go so far as to say that if somebody climbs a tree on Shabbat, we punish him and he has to stay there. You can't climb down. Now the poskim talk about if it's a kid, obviously, they didn't say this about a child. If a child climbs a tree, you don't have to make him stay there on Shabbat. You could let him come down. Also, some poskim say that you can't climb down, but you can jump down, even for an adult. But I don't think that's too common for adults climbing on trees.
Can you let kids climb?
So if they're once they're at an age, it depends on the age really. But if they're old enough to understand, which is different for every child and every family, but once they're old enough to, they reach the age of chinuch, that you start teaching them certain things, so the parent will gauge the appropriate age to like tell their child like, oh, we don't do this.
And I'm sorry, I've seen swings under trees. Like I've seen people doing that. They can't use it on Shabbat. Right?
Okay, so let's.
On a second hook.
Okay, so you're spoiling the shiur, Rivka. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I just want to talk about one more thing, and then we'll get to that. So one of the isurim is putting something on a tree or taking something off a tree. So the poskim talk about, let's say something is stuck in a tree and you want to get it down. So you can't climb the tree to take it off. If you could reach it, you can't take it off. But can you throw something else to take it off? Is that considered part of the isur of taking something off a tree or no? Anybody have any thoughts?
Like if a ball's stuck,
Yeah,
another ball.
your kids are playing ball and their ball got stuck in a tree and they're coming, mommy, abba, daddy, my ball is stuck. Can you throw a ball, another ball to get their ball or frisbee or whatever out of the tree?
Would throwing a
I
ball
think so.
would cause the leaves to fall? Like is that would that be a problem?
But will it for sure?
It's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's that concept. That
Okay, there we go. So you guys are getting there, right?
And you don't really.
Okay, so there's two considerations. One is, am I for sure going to knock anything off? Right?
No, it could be a possibility.
Right. So let's assume that I'm not for sure going to knock anything off. There's a second consideration.
If it falls, we don't care about the leaves.
That's also true. Yeah, that's part of the right. So even if for sure some leaves are going to come off, it may not be deoraita anyways. But even that heter is not like such a clean cut, whatever. It is mutar, but in certain situations we still try to stay away from using that psik resha, b'derabanan, because it depends on what type of derabanan. There's some derabanans that are a little bit more strict than other derabanans. But when it comes to this, another consideration is Chachamim said you can't remove something from a tree. Is this removing something from a tree? So some say that it's asur. It's asur even if you're not going to knock off any leaves, because Chachamim said you can't remove something from a tree, and this is removing something from a tree. Right? That's the Sefer Nishmat Shabbat discusses this, and he says that it's asur. There's another Sefer Sheilud Shua Ber Moshe. He writes that it's mutar because you're not taking it out of the tree directly. You're indirectly taking it out of the tree. You're doing something else. You're throwing something and it's causing the frisbee to fall down and come out of the tree. So we have a machloket about this. So what's the halacha? So the halacha is really, it seems like a person should try to avoid it if they can. But therefore, if it's like, something that could wait till after Shabbat, or like it's an older kid, go play with a different ball. Don't play with the ball that's stuck in the tree. Then, try to avoid it. But if it's something that's, it's a little kid and he's crying and he wants his toy that's in the tree, then, there is what to rely on to get it out of the tree by throwing something else into the tree.
What's the issue to take something out of the tree if it's not growing from it?
Or some part of it.
Right. So Chachamim made an isser called Hishtamshut Be'ilan. You're not allowed to use a tree, which includes putting something on or taking something off. Like if you can't, if there's a you want to take off your coat. Yeah, a person wants to take off their coat and hang it on a tree branch. That would be a problem, right? And then if you put it on, you also can't take it off. It's all part of the using a tree. Okay. So the poskim also talk a little bit about, you're not supposed to move trees. The poskim talk about at least like big branches of a tree. Poskim talk about if somebody's, you're cutting through somebody's backyard and you have to move the branches of the tree. So if they're thin branches, that would be mutar. If they're thicker branches, then they say you should do that b'shinui. Do it with the back of your hand or something like that. Person should avoid moving them directly. Okay, so now let's talk about swings. So included in the isur of not using a tree is not using something which is directly connected to the tree. That's called tzidei ha'ilan, things that are attached to the tree. So for example, if you have a tree and you want to use it to hang your coat or whatever, you put a nail in there, you're using the nail which is attached to the tree. That's part of the isur of using the tree. That's called tzidei ha'ilan. So not only can you not use a tree, but you can't use something which is attached to the tree. Now, there's something called tzidei tzdadim, which is something which is attached to another thing which is attached to the tree. Meaning, it's not directly attached to the tree, it's attached to a secondary thing which is attached to the tree. Right? It's attached to the tree once removed. So, based off of that, if a person wants to have like a swing or a hammock or something like that attached to the tree, they could do it in a way that would be mutar. Now, there are three things to take into account. Actually, our neighbor, our former neighbor, they moved actually down the street here, Feldman. When they were living on Boxford, they had a whole like playground with like 4 or 5 swings and hammock and whatever, all attached to trees. And they did it all in a way that could be used on Shabbat, and all the children from the block would go play there on Shabbat. So the way to do it is you have to take 3 things into consideration. Number 1, it can't be in a part of the tree that's going to cause the tree to move. Right? It shouldn't be on like a weak branch. But anyways, you wouldn't want to put a swing on a weak branch, but that's one thing, that it shouldn't be that when you're using the swing or the hammock, the tree is moving. Number 2 is it can't cut the tree. So if it's like a chain, let's say, that's attached to the branch, and then you're swinging on it, that might cut the tree. It has to be some type of cord or rope or something that won't cut the tree, or if it's a chain, just make it like very tight fit that it won't cut the tree. That's the second thing to keep in mind. And the third thing is it has to be attached to something else which is attached to the tree. So usually what you would do is you would take some type of rope or chain or cord or whatever, fasten it tightly to the tree, and then have a swing hooked onto that thing. If it all comes in one unit, then that's one thing. It has to be a separate unit, separate cord or string or whatever material you're using. So that's as far as swings on tree on Shabbat. Okay, so that really covers the Melacha of Kotzer, the Melacha of harvesting. There we'll cover one more Melacha, a very short Melacha that is very, very, it's very uncommon. There's the next Melacha after Kotzer, after they would harvest, right? If you think about the process of making bread, first they would have to plow, they would plant, then they would harvest, they would cut the wheat. You have stalks of wheat. What's the next thing that you need to do? You need to gather them together. That malacha is called ma'amer. Ma'amer is gathering things together. That's really the main concept of the malacha. It's gathering and combining fruits or grains or plants or whatever in the field. Now this malacha includes a few different actions. Number 1 is collecting things but it's only asur to collect things that grew from the ground or in the place that they grew. So because of that, for example, if fruits scatter outside in the place that they grew in the field, it would be asur to collect them together. If it's in your backyard, not where they grew, if it's in a chatzer, in a yard, it would be midrabanan, it would be asur. If it's in your house, the poskim write that it's mutar, meaning that wouldn't be a problem because the main issue is only when it's in the place that they grow. So in your house, to gather fruits together would not be a problem. Now, there are some applications of this that do not necessarily have to do with where the fruits grow. There are a couple of things, not so common nowadays, but in the times of the Gemara, they used to have what's called fig cakes, igulei devela. They used to press the figs together in like these little, I think they still have them at 7 Mile, you can find them, right? They would press them together, and that would be how they would store them and package them and transport them and sell them. So it would be a problem to do that. And also, another thing they would do is they would take dates and put them on a string, also for the purpose of having them together and attaching them to sell them, to transport them. So those are also isurim. It's not common that people will be putting dates on a thread or anything like that. That would be a problem. Rav Ovadia talks about putting pearls on a thread. He says that also would be problematic, but again, not so common on Shabbat. Somebody was asking about putting Cheerios on a thread, on a string, or something like that for kids. So I don't think, there's a big difference between what the malacha is describing. That's more putting things together for the purpose of having them, they're easier to transport, they're easier to, this is how they're packaged. When you put Cheerios on a thread, it's just for make it fun for the child to eat. So I have a hard time seeing that would be a problem.
What about putting things on SKUs?
Well, on a thing.
Yeah,
I think that's fine.
Shabbat
Yeah,
food.
I think if it's part of the act of eating, I don't think that's what we're talking about at all. I think that's why the Cheerios are fine. It should be no different than putting you take a fork and you start putting it into vegetables or whatever and you eat it. That's obviously fine. That's an act of eating. Okay, so that pretty much covers Be'ezrat Hashem for today. Next time, Be'ezrat Hashem, we're gonna begin the kitchen related malachot. We'll talk about schita and etc. We'll Be'ezrat Hashem get into those. Okay. Chazakim u'bruchim. Thank you everybody for coming.